Hi everyone, I am here today to talk to you about the SIG P320. I unfortunately do not have a full complete gun. I currently have sold the slide on this gun, so I'm unable to test this, but my thought and theory as to why some of these uncommanded discharges are occurring, I haven't seen tested online. A lot of the tests online, I feel like individuals are not aware of how the gun is designed to function, and they are testing it in manners that just are mimicking what the gun is designed to do, and maybe finding little loopholes in the design as well. But this is my theory, and I'm hoping that this video goes out and someone is able to test this on a potentially large scale to see if this is potentially an issue. Again, I have no clue. This is just a theory of mine. But to get into it, I think that potentially that the guns could be going off due to the gun being out of battery and the slide actually being over-inserted into a Safariland holster. So I have a M&P here with a Surefire X300, and if I push down on this gun, you will see that the slide actually starts to come out of battery, and so that is why I think potentially this could be one of the issues, that the guns are being pinned in a holster as such, and then when they are being bumped or jolted, some of the safety features are being bypassed and potentially causing that discharge as the gun is going back into battery. Again, this is something that will be extremely difficult to prove in any sort of scientific way. You would need what I believe would be a large scale testing environment to perform all these tests on this. But that's kind of what I think is going on. I think the guns may be over-inserted, and then the trigger bar is pushed to the rear or downward, essentially disconnecting the trigger. And in doing so, I've seen some questionable things with the captive safety lever. And also, I think that if there were vibrations delivered through the gun while it was in this position, that you are decreasing your friction and engagement between your striker hook and sear surface. So that is what I am putting out to possibly test. Here's another M&P. It's very difficult to actually get this one to do it, but if you look, they are just out of battery ever so slightly. One reason specifically Safariland puts these alignment blocks for the barrel. I don't know the exact terminology for them, but you can see them kind of in the bottom of this holster. And it is like a cone-shaped object that goes kind of to align the gun properly and to stop it from rattling. So it only needs to take the gun out of battery on this M&P. That is an out of battery slide. There is not a whole lot that's in battery. That is in battery. But you can kind of see what I'm getting at. So there's two really big things that you need to bypass on the P320. I have a 365 here, and I have the complete gun here. One is the captive safety lever needs to be rotated up, or the striker pin lock needs to be seized in an upward position on the slide. So here we have a different design on the P365 over the P320. I think that the traditional design, we will call it, is definitely more robust than the stamped steel lever type action. In fact, the only other gun I have that has anything remotely different than this is a HK, which has a rotating firing pin block. But what I think is actually potentially happening, and keep in mind, these two firearms are actually built very similar in terms of how they function and how they're designed to function. Both with the same trigger safety, delete or removal. So I hear a lot of people saying, oh, I'll carry my 365, but I won't carry a 320. I don't understand, what is technically causing these guns to go off. But I don't believe it's necessarily the lack of a trigger safety. I think that would potentially help, but I don't think that's the actual cause of these issues, potential issues, and why people are having these accidental discharges. Similar to the 365, we have a captive safety lever that rotates upward as you pull the trigger to the rearward. And what I have found is that if this captive safety lever is just up ever so slightly, and you can get this by vibrating the gun while it's in a downward position, you will see that when I push the disconnector, it actually starts to rise. And my theory is that this action is due to obviously the trigger bar being pushed downward, and that there is some sort of motion that is occurring that is causing this captive safety lever to rise. Now, it is a free-floating object, so if I do make it go up, it is very easily pushed down. There is no tension on this whatsoever. But this is kind of where I think potentially tolerance stacking or carbon buildup or brass fragments could cause this issue to occur, where it is pushing up just enough to remove that striker safety lock and disengage it. And again, the gun would be out of battery. And the other reason I say that is because SIG has done several interviews, and other individuals have developed this striker movement test, where you push down on the striker and it actually moves the trigger, but it is very difficult to push down on. And the reason is the striker actually has a tail underneath that uses the additional force that you would normally get when you're pulling on the trigger to help it pass drop safety standards due to their first issue with the Gen 1 or pre-upgrade triggers. So they added that portion of it. So this test of like pushing down on the striker is not really important to me. It is pretty difficult. There's a lot of force behind that. But when you push down on the disconnector, you actually lose that tail, the disc, and so that additional force that you're getting from that tail is no longer there. And there's only two ways to do that: is either to preload the trigger ever so slightly, and you will see that it is much easier to push, or you can push down on the disconnector, which drops the trigger bar down, and you have a free-floating surface. And the reason I think that this could potentially, again, hypothetically, be an issue is at some point the disconnector could be down. The gun could be considered out of battery by a few thou or 50 or however many thousandths of inches when the slide is to the rear. And then you have a point in which I believe that there is actually striker hook and sear engagement, but it is minimal. It is not a fully cocked striker hook on a sear, but it is something less of that, and the poundage wouldn't be nearly as much. And I believe that this it would make it easier than a fully tensioned striker and sear to essentially walk off one another. I believe that there is some sort of material surface binding of some of these parts potentially, and it is causing like a vibration or rotation of the materials, and then it is stripping that off or walking up this little ledge, and at that same time you have the disconnector that could be causing your captive safety lever, again this is kind of a stretch, to be in an upward position, removing that safety feature, and then at that same time the gun goes into battery or slides home that initial vibration, and that causes everything to align, and that there is enough velocity in the striker moving forward that the secondary sear notch does not catch it, and the captive safety lock is unable to drop down in enough time to have the firearm to catch it from striking a primer. That is again, this is a very hypothetical stretch, but I've seen a lot of videos of individuals who I think they're clever in how they're making these guns discharge, either pushing down on the sear, or the latest one was screwing a screw into your trigger, essentially taking up the pre-travel in this gun. And as you can see, this gun to the wall does not have a whole lot of movement, and that motion is already making that captive safety lever rise, and anything more on this, you're starting to actually lose engagement of the sear. You're starting to rotate that sear rearward or downward. And so I don't necessarily think that is a great test. You're essentially putting it to the point that the sear is going to drop, and then you're using that additional slide play, that few thousandths of an inch, to get that striker to move all the way home while the trigger is pulled, and then you're wondering why your safety isn't working on your striker. And it's because you've bypassed that. The functioning order is the trigger moves rearward, the captive safety moves upward, and the sear starts to move downward. And so by pulling this trigger, you're already starting to remove the most important safety, albeit probably not the best design potentially. Just going on how many other firearms do not use what SIG and SIG uses in this particular firearm. But that's just, my 2 cents on what I think could potentially be causing this gun to go off. Again, I have no clue. I have no ability to test this. So the reason I am actually making this video is so that someone else, or a large independent firm who has numerous firearms, can actually test this. I think there's multiple things that need to occur in order to get this gun to fire. Also, let me actually say, with M17 and M18 variants with a manual safety, the way that works is it actually locks the trigger bar in place. So you don't really get that play. Why I think this also, which the screw and the slide moving, it's a little bit of a stretch, because if a manual safety was on, you wouldn't have that ability to move that trigger to the rear. And I suspect that there are cases in which this gun has gone off or discharged in which that safety has actually been activated, is on, and it's still going off. So that's why I don't think that the shaking the slide while pulling the trigger most of the way is truly proving anything. But as I said, if the gun is out of battery, the trigger is essentially dead. And so the lock can be up and the gun can be, out of battery by a few thousandths or however far it needs to go to activate this lever. And so that would actually help explain some of this. Again, there are numerous things that need to go wrong in order to have this happen. But I feel like there is a point in which, again, those surfaces are going to be reduced in terms of tension, and possibly due to materials having enough friction that you can actually have your sear the striker hook walk up the sear could potentially be possible. I, again, have no clue. I'm just making this video to see what other people think, if this is even feasible. I hope, SIG has thought of this and possibly tested it. But if not, hopefully someone else can. So thank you.